The purpose of this video is to give the case against Global Britain. For those parts of the UK that want separation and independence from the UK, Scotland and Wales in particular, we get attacked continuously against various questions in the economy. The people that support Global Britain do not put a case forward why you should stay with them. This is the case against Global Britain. Global Britain. This is the empire that Britain had at one time, not all necessarily at the same time. For example, those parts of the United States of America were well before other parts in Africa and so on. This is in actual fact the empire now. These are the inhabited islands within the empire. There are of course uninhabited islands, particularly near Antarctica. The UK itself is built up of disparate parts that joined into England, if you like, at different times during their history. So this is the British Empire. This is Global Britain's actual situation. From a growth starting really in the 1600s up until now, when it's just got a few islands. If you go into Google or any other search engine and type in the words Global Britain, you'll see a whole range of websites concerning and talking about Global Britain and how great Britain is. This really happened just before Brexit. This picture here was taken from that. It tries to show on the right that we've got a great democracy going back through centuries. It doesn't tell you that it's not fit for purpose. The building's falling apart. The procedures are archaic and centuries old. It's not even a fair voting system because it's first past the post. Bottom left, City of London, a powerhouse of wealth. It is, and it still is, but it's declining, and its procedures and processes are putting things at risk here and in other countries. And the top left with one of the new carriers, which doesn't have enough aircraft, neither of them do, is trying to show Britain is a power in the world. It isn't. The Royal Navy, the RAF and the Army is currently the smallest it's been in the UK's total history, measuring from 1800. So this is what the talk is about. During the talk I'm going to show lots of graphs and information. Please let the slides run at their normal speed, and then if you're interested, go back. The purpose is to give an impression, and I understand that not everyone is okay with graphs, and I'll try as such to explain them. So first of all, briefly, to look at democracy and respect in Global Britain. The UK has many different voting systems, but the main one for the UK Parliament is first past the post. The others are variations of proportional representation, where the people that are elected or voted for is roughly in proportion to the number of votes from each person relative to the party or policy. So here's a show of what that means. In the UK here, what you can see is the actual seat distribution in the 2019 first past the post election. If you however made it a proportional representation thing, and there are various ways of doing PR, you can see that the Conservatives get less, Labour gets more, Lib Dems get more, SNP gets less, and we see Plaid Cymru for the first time. As a comparison, the German Parliament, which is called the Bundestag, they use PR now, as every other country in Europe does, and you can see the parties in the seat distribution. However, if the Bundestag used the UK system, this is the seat distribution. This more starkly shows how unfair first past the post is. Here are the results of the 2019 UK election. This election only had 67.3% of the voting public, and these are the MPs that each party passed. You can see the Conservatives, with 43.6% of this electoral vote here, got a majority of 80 seats. That shows that the first past the post system has an inbuilt bias and in no way represents the people in the country. The other thing we have in this country is no written constitution. This means that the government of this country at the UK level is based on convention built up over centuries. What we've seen since 2010 is that these people are now breaking those conventions and breaking those rules. We saw the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, break his own rules, regularly lie to Parliament, regularly break parliamentary conventions. In the past, not long ago, he would automatically have resigned for insulting Parliament. This contempt of Parliament isn't just from the Prime Minister, but over the last 10 or 15 years it's getting worse, and it includes cabinet ministers. None resign. Organisations that are there that to do with the Electoral Commission, for instance, have been picking up in the last 3 elections the Conservatives for misuse of funds. So now, under the current government, they're busy attacking the Electoral Commission to take power from them. They tried to prorogue Parliament to get something through undemocratically, but they lost that law fight. Basically what they're doing at the moment is brutalising Parliament. They contort, deflect, as you see here, and they make insulting, stupid statements. Brexit said we'll do levelling up funds, and we'll do the levelling up funds across the country. This was to replace the EU funds that were coming in, but it was also to correct the imbalance between the south of England, the north of England, Scotland and Wales. That's actually been not happening. In January this year, there was only one non-Conservative council that got money from the levelling up fund. And they're also not keeping up with the money we used to get from the EU. So basically what they're doing is breaking establishing conventions, dealing with everything. But in the devolved parliaments, there's been conventions set up since 1999. As soon as the Brexit campaign started, the people in London started to ignore the 3 devolved areas of the UK and broke convention. They're also putting laws in place that are going against the devolved parliaments without consultation with those parliaments and approval by those parliaments. To sort this, we need a written constitution, but we also need people that are in power that actually respect the people and respect the institutions. Democracy in the UK is actually very weak. So, a couple of slides on the long-term trends within the UK in this Global Britain. On this chart here, there's 2 graphs. I'm going to explain to you what they are, starting with the bottom one. If you count 0 in 1955, and if all movements in this graph are relative to the situation in 1955, and this is the variation of the country's domestic growth and product relative to 1955, and the fluctuation plus or minus from the figure at that time, taking inflation out. As you can see, it goes pretty steady, and here the UK joins the EEC to try and improve the economy. At the same time, there was a massive slump, and in that slump there was 15% unemployment, inflation between 15 and 20%, mortgages briefly at 15%. It was a terrible time. We had 4 years of 2% pay rises within that. So this brought in a Conservative government under Margaret Thatcher, and everything went along tickety-boo, fights with the miners and so on. And then during this, with the policies of the Conservative government then, linked to what was happening in Europe with the removal of the Berlin Wall and the Cold War, and eventually China coming out. Manufacturing declined from 55% of the economy to today 19%. And you can see this decline here. Manufacturing creates wealth. This was the point where our economy moved from manufacturing to service. Then you can see here 2000, how when all that cut in, the service economy and the manufacturing had gone, and hundreds of factories in the UK that employed thousands and thousands of people disappeared. You can see that the growth in the wealth of the country has been declining ever since. And this is the percentage variation. This one is the same thing, but it's in money terms, in billions of pounds. So this is 0 again in 1955. So if the graph goes up to 10, that is a £10 billion improvement in the GDP, and that's a £10 billion loss every year. So as you see, it came along, and then in the 70s here, when there was a wobble, it started to go. And you can see in the graph below, there's a rapid drop here, and you can see that things started to go totally differently. The red line in the middle, most people won't have heard of it. It's primary income. It's a net flow of profits and interest leaving the country in and out. If you like, it's our profitability with the rest of the world. So you can see what's happening here. It's not going well. It's erratic. This graph, this part here is services. So services have gone up because we've moved here away from a manufacturing economy, and you can see here the manufacturing drop. Manufacturing creates wealth, higher paid jobs, lots of semi-skilled jobs, and also more export, and you get more money in on your balance of payments. In the UK, Scotland is unique that from the start of the last century, the 1900s, Scotland has almost had a trading surplus. If you go to the 2000, year 2000, England, all of England, including London and the southeast, to do with export and import trade, the whole of England has run at a loss. Wales is running at a slight loss on trade, has a slight deficit. Northern Ireland in the last 2 years has had a trade surplus. So that's the situation in the UK. Things aren't going well long term. It's a downward spiral. This is looking at manufacturing output here. So this is billions, and this is the percentage of GDP again. So these graphs, don't forget, they include inflation figures. Inflation has not been taken out. So the situation is worse than what you see. So here is the amount of wealth created by manufacturing in the years from 1990. And that's the output in billions of pounds. It's converted to US dollars because I took this from a graph from a US company doing world comparatives of different countries. So here you are, it looks like it's gone up, but it hasn't, because inflation has dropped it down, and you saw that in the drop in manufacturing in the previous chart. The UK national debt, this is the public sector debt as a percentage of the wealth of the country. In 2008, the banking crisis, the Bank of England did a thing called quantitative easing, where it created money from mid-air to actually offset the bail out the banks, which increased our debt. And then around here, the Conservative government, after 12 years of austerity, when the people on the bottom end of the scale suffered and suffered even more, and pay rises, if there was, were very low. But here they were telling us that that's austerity over, we're on the up. But then Brexit happened here, and then COVID happened. The UK's debt is increasing. It's roughly $2.4 trillion. All these changes affect the population. This was the population historically, and this is what the UN projects for the UK population. But this is the annual change that's actually happened down here in percentage terms. You can see that the UK population increased, and then it declined after the 70s, and manufacturing went and people left the country. There was talk of a brain drain at the time. And then then people from the EU started to come here. And they started to come, and then the right-wing people within the country started shouting, "Oh, get rid of these people, we don't want anybody else in." So they talked about Brexit. So Brexit happened and all these people started to leave. And because the UK population is declining, this is what the UN now projects for the UK population. A negative growth, declining country, less output, less money. Now have a look at some short-term economic trends. This is just a very recent change in the output of the country. And you can see that it's dropped dramatically since 2020, because that's when Brexit happened. And you can see the drop down and you can see the effect. In fact, going back to industrial output, it's lower now than it was, the same level as 1993, adjusting for inflation. This is short term. So what we're looking at the top graph first. This is prior to Brexit. Brexit happened here. So these are the economies of Japan, the whole Euro area, America, advanced technologies in purple, and the whole world exports. You can see that they were all chugging along. COVID hit, and all these other parts of the world that are economically developed picked up, and they're chugging along. The UK, prior to Brexit, had already started to decline because of Brexit. So you can see Brexit declining here. And then when everybody else with COVID started going up, we kept level. This is due to the lot of money with trade. It's due to high inflation caused by Brexit, meaning that what you buy in the world markets, for particularly energy with the dollar, because if the pound drops against the dollar, it actually increases inflation. And 20% of the inflation we have seen in the last year is caused by the pound drop against the dollar. Another big whack of it, almost the same, is caused by Brexit. So here's the UK trade deficit. That's the amount of loss. And it's a 3 month. So you can see here from January with Brexit, how much money every month the UK was rolling. These are billions of pounds. Oh, sorry, millions of pounds. And you can see it comes along and it's erratic. And it drops. This is a fluctuation in sterling during the last many years. And you can see how the UK is getting worse to the right, because the strength of the economy and the loss of manufacturing and the poor governance of the country has caused it to fail. This is a more up-to-date graph on currency. You can see that in those short 5 days there, the UK lost $500 billion because of currency fluctuations. Don't forget, all our fuel is bought in dollars. All our gas is bought in dollars. The pandemic affected all countries differently. You can see here that the UK suffered the same as Italy and France. This is the first lockdown, this is the second. However, Italy, France and all the others recovered, as the previous chart showed, but the UK did not. The figures down, the blue lines coming down here, are how much we're below going upwards. It's negative, negative, negative. Now the negative is increasing due to COVID and also due to Brexit. So what do people think about this? This is what was in our 2021 report at the end of 21 from Ipsos Mori. Most people in the public can see what's happening with dismay. Brexit. This year, 2022, there's been 3 reports saying how much Brexit's costing the UK. One report said 100, 109, 123 billion pound lost every single year. That's in addition to the 42 billion it cost us to leave in the first place. The pound is its lowest level for 40 years, causing inflation. Brexit's causing inflation. Brexit caused a loss in labour, especially in all sectors of the economy, but particularly in the caring side and the hospitality side. Businesses are struggling and going out of business because of this. The NHS in England, for instance, due to people from the EU leaving, lost 40,000 nurses. Not a Brexit thing, but productivity has flatlined since 2008. This is emigration out of the UK. So here's the EU people coming in their high peaks that the Conservative Party were really concerned about. And you can see it levelled off because the EU people realised they weren't wanted. So you can see here the Brexit referendum coming and the loss of people from the EU. This is the figures between June 2020 and June 21 for net migration in. You can see here the EU, it was very low in 2020 and it dropped negative in 21. Over here they were talking about 250,000 people coming in every year and we had to stop it. These are non-EU people. Look at the figure. The success story of the government to stop immigration has been poor. The country needs immigration, otherwise you can't grow businesses because you don't have people to grow that business. This is self-explanatory. This is what Brexit did in the first 2 months of 2020 to the economy. I mentioned earlier debt. So this is the debt of the UK going up. We lost manufacturing, so we had less wealth, less money coming in. So the government started to increase debt. Then we had this thing called the 2008 bank crisis, and they started printing money out of thin air, which increased the debt significantly. The bad news is Brexit and then COVID has making it go way up to here. There it was 2 trillion. So it's now up here at 2.4 trillion. The more debt you have, the more it costs the government. The loss of Brexit, money, the drop in the pound and causing inflation, the congestion and problems with things at the border means that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has less and less revenue coming in, less and less scope to do things. So, as I mentioned earlier briefly, Brexit has increased disrespect to the devolved nations. They're getting ignored because Global Britain feels that Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland are actually just part of this mythical country called the UK. There's been a significant decline in the UK economy, most of it, but not all of it, caused by Brexit. Brexit was created by a move to the right by Westminster. And this is causing us gradually now, as changes are going on, to lose EU law protection, human rights, hours you work, food hygiene. All these things are starting to decline with laws that are going through now. There's an attempt to lift self with this Global Britain hype. If you come through border control into the UK, you'll see a big sign that says, "Welcome to Great Britain," with the word "great" in huge writing. But the world thinks we're idiots, and the world thinks we can't manage the economy, and the world is dismayed at how poorly we're being run, and the UK has been declining for a long time, which they know, but it's increasing. And all this Brexit stuff and the changes that are going on is increasing support for the breakup of the UK. This is uncertainty because of Brexit, the number of people that are concerned about Brexit before Brexit actually happened. Even before Brexit, there was an inflation factor equivalent to £879 per household because of worries and changes. Brexit caused the the GDP of the country to drop to 5.2%. You think, well, that's not a lot. In the bank crisis of 2008, the GDP dropped 2.6%. We had 12 years of austerity, low wage rises, particularly for the poor. The UK is the lowest growth in the EU. In October 2022, one of the three world credit rating agencies, Fitch, dropped the status from the UK to AA-. This means that all debt the UK has now have to pay higher interest rates, which makes things worse again. Brexit is one of the main causes of inflation, and Brexit is one of the main reasons for the drop in the pound against the dollar, which again causes inflation. I'm going to digress to NHS England. During the last 20 years, particularly the last 10, when we had the austerity after the 2008 crisis, the government at Westminster kept saying they're funding the NHS, but they didn't. They just gave it the inflation increase, but the inflation increase is no good for the NHS because drug prices and things go up higher than inflation. We've also had more people coming into the country and a poor building programme, particularly in England. So I'm going to show you now some information analysing the last 10 years in NHS England. These are the waiting times, and you can see under the different Tory governments since 2010 how the waiting times at A&E went up. This is the major A&Es. What this doesn't tell you is that around this time here, the then Health Secretary Hunt changed the rules because England was so bad, and he changed it so that whereas the AE time in Scotland and the north of Ireland, they clock you in when you walk in the door, and that's when the clock starts. And if you haven't been dealt with or put into the hospital 4 hours later, then you failed the test. In England, what they did was you walk in the door and wait for any length of time, that could be hours or minutes. And then when you start to be attended to, the clock starts for the 4 hours from there. It's a distortion and a lie. These are the same for the 4-hour and 12-hour wait times. You can see that things are dramatically getting worse in NHS England. In the last 12 months, 21 to 22, 40,000 nurses, that's 1 in 9 of nurses in England, have left the service. And that's in addition to the EU nurses and doctors that left prior to that. There's even some GPs doing what the dentist did 20 years ago. They're going private, they're leaving the NHS. In England, 22% of the NHS is privatised now, whereas in Scotland it's only 2 or 3%. This is about cancer health, the same trend. This is the length of the waiting lists. So here's a comparison for A&E times. Remember, England distorted the figures. And this is for 21-22. Apologies for the blur, it was copied from a small image. You can see how Scotland's got the lowest times. And England's here and here. But don't forget, they distort the figures. Their true figure is worse than this. So all this that's going on in Global Britain, how does that change society? When you actually have a decline in the economy and you do things wrong, it means that the government has less room to help people on the lower income levels. And there's been a trend in the last 20 years, 30 years, to the disparity between the lower paid and the wealthy is growing rapidly. And the lower paid, because of the austerity from 2008 and so on, in real terms is suffering. In real terms, their income is going down. Basically, the government can sort this with correct taxation and benefit policies that are progressive and help. You can still earn money if you have qualifications and get on and push and grow business, because you should be rewarded. But at the same time, what's happening in the UK is that the people of the bottom are suffering because their income isn't keeping up. So let's look at poverty in the world. Poverty is measured in different ways, but this chart here takes the average poverty in the UK of the average wage, so it's half of the average wage, just to show a trend. So the trend here is the UK. So the farther you are up and the farther you're to the right compared with other countries, it's the poverty level. So because the median here is 0.12 something, that means that actual poverty is double that because it's the median point of poverty. But when you compare that with other countries, you can see that the UK isn't doing well in poverty. Apologise, this is hard to read. This is because it's a copy once again of a small image. Putting meat on the bones, this is people on consistently low wages by part of the UK. So this is before housing costs. So you can see the UK before housing costs is 9% of poverty. But if you take housing in effect, they are saying on the same median it's 12%. So this is why London here has 9% without housing costs, but 17 here because of the cost of housing. You can see that Scotland still has too much poverty, but it's lower than other parts of the UK. But things are going bad. This is the situation before housing costs and after housing costs in the 3 years 17 to 20, and you can see it's getting worse in all areas. Poverty is increasing, it's going downhill. So what about income inequality? Same type of chart as earlier, but this chart is the ratio, the difference between the average of the 20 richest people in the country with the 20 poorest. Once again, here's the UK. So what that tells you, because it's a ratio between the average of the 20% richest and the 20% poorest, that tells you that the UK, the 20% of the wealthiest have 6 times the income of the 20% of the lowest. And here's other countries as a sample. We're not doing too well, really. Global Britain's image is not very good. And this shows the trend that the 1% of the population have what they have of the UK's total wealth. You can see that it's been pretty steady prior to this. And then the benefit system and the taxation system changed. We lost manufacturing and various things. And the tax policies didn't improve. So you can see that there's more and more people here taking away more and more of the money of the country. This shows the same thing in a different way. What this shows you, that's the number of households. So that's like 1,000, that's like 1 million households. In thousands. So, and that's in thousands of pounds going this way. So I'll show you that. So somebody here earning just under £20,000 in this group here is that number of households. And the average wage in the country when this chart was created was 26,000. So you can see the number of households as an idea in the area of that graph that are below average income levels. That's just the average for the country as a whole at the time. And you can see the number of households here that actually earn a lot of money. Taxing a small number of people with higher taxes, as is often said with people that have socialist extreme views, that you can help the poor by increasing taxes on the rich. You could increase your taxes there as much as you like, but it's not going to affect this majority of people here very much. This is what happened at the end of September 22 when the Truss government and the Exchequer decided to change the tax policies. This is the benefit of those tax policy changes to the different 10% groupings of the country. So you can see who benefited. To show where the money goes, the bottom fifth of the population have 8% of the income. And as you go up, the second fifth get 13%, third fifth 17%, and the top 40% of the country get, top fifth of the people get 40% of the wealth. What we need is a taxation policy. I'm not talking about communism here, but we need to actually help these people here. So the people here somehow, and the businesses, need to somehow pay more tax to help the people here. That's not happening in Global Britain. It's actually getting worse. Here's disposable income. If you're on the lower income levels, 30% of your income goes in taxes and things you can't do without. So you have less disposable income. And that's the top wealthy. Because they earn more, they pay less, and the taxation system means that they're paying less taxes relative to their income, and you can see the effect. Pensions. Of the 64 countries in the Organisation of Economic Development Countries, the average pension is 62.9% of those countries' average wage. This is the UK here, 29%. So that when you retire in the UK, your UK state pension is 29% of the average wage, which isn't enough to live on if that's all your income is. That, of course, means more benefit payments, which puts more weight on the tax burden of the country. I've told you a lot very quickly, which if you go through it slowly and use this video slider, you can get more information at your leisure. But here's a summary. The economy in the UK, in this Global Britain of ours, is declining since the 1970s. From the mid-80s onwards, we had a significant loss in manufacturing and we moved to a service economy. This meant we had less skilled jobs, less higher paid jobs, less money coming into the country. We moved to a service economy, and when people are worried about things, they spend less. So a service economy has a more negative effect when things go wrong to the economy. And you can see that earlier when I showed how after COVID and inflation, while the UK economy is running level when everybody else has bounced back. Brexit has damaged the UK in terms of inflation, costs, esteem in the country. But it's never mentioned by the media. It's an invisible word. They'll say anything but blame Brexit because that blames the government. Westminster's breaking parliamentary conventions, and that's getting worse. It's ignoring and cheating and doing things wrong with the devolved parliaments. They're breaking convention. There's a high level of social and financial inequality in this country, and it's getting worse. In the last 20 years since 2008, and before that, the 2000 onwards, it's got worse. We have the lowest pension rates in the 64 countries of the OECD. We have a significant drop in disposable income, particularly for the people low paid. That's why there's been an increase in food banks. The government doesn't seem to know. If you look back to what's been happening on the graphs earlier, especially the long-term trends, want to do to turn the economy around. They tinker with finance without actually understanding what they need to do in the long term to sort the country. Global Britain keeps telling you that the UK is the 5th largest country in the world, and they base that on the country's turnover, not efficiency but turnover. In fact, they're wrong. We're now the 6th. But there are several measures of wealth. Here's one. GDP per capita. What that means is, if you take the wealth created by the country and divide it by the per population, you get a number. This is from a worldwide table. So the most in last year, the most productive country in the world was Luxembourg, and that meant that on average every employee there created that amount of money every year in wealth for the country. And it declines here, and you can see it's getting less. So Germany, for instance, each employee in Germany creates $63,000 worth of wealth. Ireland, 124,000. It's the third most profitable and efficient country in the world based on this measure. The UK is 30th in this measure. And there's another measure to do with happiness within the country, and the UK is 35th in that, in the world. All this means one thing. There's a whole mass of information. If you just go into Google and search UK decline, debt trends, income equality trends in the UK, you'll get a mass of information. I've provided some of it here. But this is the truth. The UK is a failing state and it's declining. Tony Benn was a minister in the last century, in the 60s and 70s, and he said this about the Global Britain. The Britain's only colony in the empire is Britain itself. What he actually meant was, we have these stupid rules in Parliament, procedures in Parliament. We have the House of Lords, which is an anachronism from the past, and it's a way to reward people that help your party. It has no democratic rule or position. It's ignored by the House of Commons anyway. The monarchy, the titles and things that go on in the country are archaic, and they're a hangover from an age of empire. We need to move on. We need to get rid of Global Britain. And we can do this with independence. Scotland hasn't been represented evenly since 1955 with successive governments. There's been very few governments that Scotland has actually voted for. Scotland also has a different view of life. It wants to be more balanced with the lower paid. Yes, reward people that work hard and get on in life, but don't do that at the detriment of the really poor. Have better wage inequality. Be a more equal society. Be a greener society. This is what Scotland wants, and that's what independence will give. Thank you for listening. Here are some other videos if you're interested that you can have a look at that I've created over the years. Thank you.